Hi guys, Sugar here with a new video, and this video will be my solo shuffle prediction tier list video for Dragonflight. We are talking about Dragonflight only and not pre-patch because again, I think Dragonflight is going to be the most important thing for now, and we are not going to take pre-patch into account where all the shenanigans is actually available, right? So you should also know I'm trying to predict the meta for season 1, so everything coming into Dragonflight will be either buffed or nerfed. But I'm going to talk about the kits mostly and not only about the numbers. So, for example, Arms Warrior, although I think it will be meta somehow, some way in season 1, for now I don't see them doing a lot of drastic buffs. And they could do that by just removing the PvP modifiers that they actually put previously, but for now I'm only going to judge based on kit and current strength. Now, let's talk right away with the first class, which is Demon Hunter. And we're only going to talk about Havoc because everything based about tanks will be discussed at the end of the video, because I think there is a place into the meta where tanks can perform, since now you have only one tank available in a 3v3 match in solo shuffle, or two tanks if you're playing protection paladin, but I don't think many will play protection paladin. But it will be discussed at the end of the video, and you have timestamps at the description of the video, but also I think on the bar you can just see when I'm going to talk about which class. Alright, let's talk about Havoc Demon Hunter. And Havoc Demon Hunter is, no surprise for everyone, going to be S tier going into Dragonflight. The reason is the kit is very vast. You have a lot of CC, a lot of mobility, a lot of actual defensives in solo shuffle, because in solo shuffle the matches are very short, so a blur and a darkness will be enough to actually survive a lot of damage while your like healer is CC'd. You have a lot of ways to actually go back to your healers because of your mobility, and your damage is quite obnoxious at the moment. Um, I feel like they are going to get nerfed. I feel like even though they are going to get nerfed number wise, it will be A plus or A to the minimum. I think it will even stay S tier, but it will not be as obnoxious as right now. But I think PvP tuning will be, or will have to be actually online for the demon hunters, because it's actually very obnoxious to play against, especially in solo shuffle where you can end up in a 3 demon hunter like solo shuffle. As a caster, it becomes very hard to actually perform. Now let's talk about Warlocks, and we are going to talk about Affliction Warlock, a spec I always really loved since the end of times, and right now in Dragonflight they really did it well. I think Affliction Warlocks have a lot of builds I'm going to discuss in the future whenever Dragonflight is going to be online, because I don't want to like spoil a lot of people. I think it is going to be very fun to actually talk about those builds and actually show gameplay for those builds. But let's talk about the tier list. And for me, Affliction Warlock is going to be A plus, which is above the meta. It is close to the S tier, but the reason why I'm not putting in S tier is if you're falling into a, I would say, solo shuffle that is highly oriented for melees. Let's say you are falling versus 3 melees and you are the only Affliction Warlock. It is going to be very bad for you, especially if you end up playing versus a Resto Shaman for some reason. It has a grounding totem and a wind shear, becomes very hard to perform. And of course, versus casters, are going to get a field day. And in mixed matchups where you have like two casters, two melees, you're going to be all right. And that's why I think it's a A plus category. You also should know that they have a lot of self healing, although in solo shuffle dampening is very high, so self healing is not really the only reason that it's going to be good. But you have Dark Pact, you have ways to do a lot of damage, and people just don't know how to play versus Affliction Warlocks, and that is the biggest reason why it's actually performing. When people know what the Affliction Warlock is doing, it becomes a lot harder to perform. And it doesn't matter, but for me it's A plus. And I see people put it in S tier or even in A tier. I think it's around the S and the A tier category. So if you put it in A tier, it's still right. If it's going in S tier for you, I can understand it. But for me, it's really between those two tiers. Now let's talk about demonology. Demonology is probably the S tier Warlock spec. It has basically a lot of CC, which they can themselves cross CC easily, but also like direct, so you can fear and stun at the same time because you don't have GCDs for both abilities. And you really have a lot of annoyance. Like the factor of annoyance is very big. It's annoying to play versus demonology. It's also annoying to play with demonology, to be honest. They have a lot of damage, they have a lot of consistent damage, they have a lot of build up that they can do, but the build up is not as hard to do in solo shuffle. um, I think it's S tier because it is just simply better than Affliction. Although I feel like Affliction is harder to play, and that's also a factor why it is actually beneath the Demonology Warlock. But it could change with like some nerfs towards different builds that they can actually do. Now let's talk about like Destruction Warlock, and Destruction Warlock deserves B tier. It's an average spec. It's very hard to perform in solo shuffle. I really love Destruction. I'm going to play a lot of Destruction, and I have also a lot of builds in my mind. But the difference is in solo shuffle, you don't have a lot of breathing room to do a lot of damage, and the healers really have to play around you because you know that you're going to get focused from A to Z. There is no one point where you're actually going to free cast. I feel like people that are letting a Destruction Warlock free cast are making a mistake because the damage is not B tier, it's probably S tier, but the difference is that it's actually very difficult to perform, and that's why it's B tier. Especially versus melees. If you have like a melee oriented solo shuffle, it becomes very hard to perform. Now let's talk about arcane mages. So we are now in the mages category, and we are going to put arcane mage in A tier. It is a meta spec. The reason why it's actually performing is they have a lot of burst damage, they have a lot of mobility, they have also quite a lot of consistent damage. They are more of a setup class, which is in general not as good as consistent or bursty classes in solo shuffle, but you're not limited to a setup. You can also just do your damage by your own and set up your own kills without even a polymorph. And once you have a lot of like clear casting, and you're going to do a lot of damage with Arcane Missiles and Arcane Barrage, with Arcane Surge, and of course the um, great abilities that you have at your disposal with mobility and defensive capacities, you are going to actually be very good and very annoying to kill. I think arcane mages are very annoying to kill compared to the other specs. And if I need to compare it, Fire Mage is really a D tier spec. I'm not going to be a hipster about Fire Mages. I think Fire Mages in general are a lot harder to pull off. I think you're going to be able to climb as a fire mage, and luckily, you're actually only competing with the same people that are playing with the same specs. So if you're like playing a fire mage, you're competing with other fire mages for the rank 1 title, right? So you can find some solace in that like sense, but again, your combust is dispellable, your defensives are dispellable, you have the mobility, but really arcane mages has that too. You have ice wall, but everyone has that. Ring of fire is nothing special anymore because everyone has that, like mages wise. So it's either you are going for a combust build, so you're going for a setup build, which is something very difficult to do in a solo shuffle environment. It's already very hard to do as an RMP without communication, but imagine if you're playing like a solo shuffle without a rogue and without communication with very selfish players. It becomes very hard to actually perform, especially if you're playing versus specific counters where you could get dispelled in one global, your combust, and then it's over. Um, Now, you should also notice there is also a casting build where you're going to cast a lot of pyroblasts, like not instant, but really casting those pyroblasts. and it really does damage. But again, you will need a lot of haste to make it work, but also a lot of assistance from your teammates. And I don't think in Soul Shuffle you do get that moment of grace where you're going to cast a lot of Pyroblasts and then you're going to get a combust from it and keep on rolling. I don't think that's going to happen. It could happen. Again, it depends about the comps, it depends about the Solo Shuffle itself, if you're playing versus casters or not. But yeah, just all those factors just deserves the D tier spot. Frost mages for me they are B tier, the same as a destruction warlock. They do need to cast a lot, or they play an Icelands build, but it is a lot harder to make it work compared to an arcane mage, compared to an affliction warlock, even compared with a destruction warlock. They are really similar. They have defensives though, but I think Destruction Warlock has a bit better, although the mobility is probably for the mages. Um, you have some builds, so if you want to like look up some builds, please go to Verruc's channel, watch his videos about frost mages, and you will see that there is a lot of possibilities for you to make it work. That's why it's B tier, it's average. It means that you will have struggles versus like a triple melee soul shuffle, where people are just going to tunnel you and then you will have some difficulties. But if you play versus like casters, you're going to perform because you have a lot more leniency to do a lot of damage. Now, let's talk about warriors. And I'm going to be honest, I might be biased. I'm really liking the arms builds. I just feel like the damage is really not there because of PvP modifiers still being around. Or just fatality, which is a talent you can just go for as arms, is gigantically nerfed in PvP. It's not going to do any great damage. Um, the same for bleeds. They also like somewhat nerfed the bleeds. They also nerfed 50% of intervene. Defensive stance still nerfed. Although and when Fury Warriors get that for free every time they do a rampage, like they should do some PvP tuning here and there, and just for that, I think it's like on the verge of C tier, but I'm going to put it on B tier because I think solo shuffle wise, I'm predicting season one they will get a buff. I don't think they will get like the buff they need or deserve. They will just get like a slight buff because they don't want to over buff people. And just for that, I think it's going to be B tier. Of course, it's a prediction. That might be wrong. It could even go S tier if they didn't actually buffed it correctly. But for me, it's going to be B tier for now, and it's not bad. It just means that it's going to be harder for you to climb. Luckily, again, like the farming mages, you're only competing with the same spec. So if you're like an arms warrior and you're 2k and you're the best arms warrior on the whole planet, you're going to be rank 1. So um, that's some solace in the misery that you can get as an arms warrior. I think Fury is a little bit better. It's A tier. It is meta, I would say. They just need like one nerf for demon hunters, which is damage, and it might take the place of a havoc demon hunter. But for now, they have the utility, they have the defensives, they have the stunts, they have the fear. But havoc just has all of that, but better. And that's why it's like A tier compared to S tier with havoc demon hunter. And you can make it work, but it's a hassle in general. Um, but that's why it's also A tier because you can really make it work. It just is a lot harder compared to a Havoc Demon Hunter. That's why it just needs some separation between those two specs. Assassination Rogue is for me a A tier spec. I know some people do rate it a little bit lower, but it does some insane amounts of damage. And sometimes in Solo Shuffle, damage could be enough to win you the game. You have also somewhat great CC, at least some great kill CC. So you try to kidney shot the actual kill target, and you will do a lot of damage, or you're trying to blind it at the right time and then you do a gouge and then you do vanish cheap shot, and you have like some great sequences where you could win a game just because the healer is mispositioned. Of course, just because of that, blind is getting broken by AoE. So for example, a demon hunter that is doing some blind, annoying spell is going to actually break your blind. And that is going to be very, very hard to come back whenever you see that your blind is going to be misused because of your teammate. And that just alone makes it harder. And that's why it's an A tier, but it could be like A plus or S tier. But just because of that fact, it is the A tier spec. Outlaw Rogue, I wanted to say Combat Rogue because of Wrath of the Lich King, but Outlaw Rogue deserves the B spot. I think you can perform it on it. It is for sure a more slow spec, and sometimes in solo shuffle, being more slow just means it's a bit more hard to carry games. The good thing is about like Outlaw Rogues is that you could have a lot of defensives on yourself to actually survive a lot of damage, and just because of that you could win games because again, if they're not focusing you and you have like a mate that is a bit more as survivable as well, you could really perform on that spec. But again, you're like really reliant on CC, and the problem is with relying on CC is that people can break it, and whenever people can break it, it becomes a very hard challenge to win games where CC is needed. Subtlety Rogue, I think it's a low B. I would even say C tier, but my prediction will be that they will be B tier spot, like a B tier spec in Soul Shuffle, because they do get Shadowy Duel, which again, if you have a great rotation, great damage, you could kill in one go. But the nerfs of Kidney Shot, plus also the Trinkets set, which reduces CC, plus another fact where your damage is not really lining up, so you would need some buffs from Blizzard to actually make it work, but I don't think they will really buff it too much because in 3s and in 2s Stability Rogue might just do the trick. So there is like some difficulties there to actually balance it for solo shuffle, because I don't think they are actually going to balance it for solo shuffle. Your CC again can get broken, and that's something that some classes just don't need to deal with it, and that's why it's a beater. They also don't really have a rush down feel like an assassination rogue has, so being of at least having to re-stealth to do more damage and such is not an option, because you are going to leave your teammate in a 2v3 situation without communication, without trust, and people are going to make mistakes, and those mistakes could be just fatal for your solo shuffle. Balance Druid is for me a B tier spec. You will see that the tendencies is a lot of people, a lot of classes and specs will be around A, B, and A plus, and you have like some outliers in C and D, and also in S. So that is normal. Balance Druid is going to be like somewhat good in situations, and then somewhat bad because you will lack the damage to actually finish off targets. But you have some windows of where you could really win a game. Like for example, a root beam could be enough to win you a game. A cyclone at the right time, and then a root beam, and then if you play bash or if you play Inca you really have a lot of CC going on that is not really breakable. So you have that as an advantage. So that's why it's for me the most B tier spec, at least from that amount of specs. I think they really can perform, but it's just a question of time where do they get buffs or do they get nerfs going into PvP. I think the problem is in PvE you do get a lot of nerfs, and they have to put a PvP modifier somewhat to actually compensate. But for now they didn't do that, so we don't know if it's going to be good or not. Feral Druids. So Feral Druids are for me A plus. They are actual great melee that is going to decimate a lot of people. They have bleeds, which makes that they only have a lot of like difficulties to kill people whenever they have to burst. But the consistent damage and the burstiness at some points in the game could just be enough to make you win games. You have Cyclone, you have off healing, you have Bear Form to survive, your dots can spread, and you do some great cleave. I think they are A plus and not S because of the reason where they could force you into bear form. and whenever you are in bear form, you have like no real impact in killing people off, right? And just because of that, for me, it's an A plus. You do wreck a lot of people, and you are immune to CC most of the time whenever you are cat form, like for example polymorphs, and that's something that a lot of classes are there to actually deal with. And feral druids in general, they are really great, but they are risky. they they are really nerf prone. Like for example, an affliction warlock, they are not really in a situation where they are going to say, "Look, this expansion is mine," because they could get nerfed at any point. While for example, an arms warrior in Shadowlands, they could say, "Look, this is my expansion," or a warrior in general is going to say, "This is my expansion." While feral druid has to deal with patches going to be very good or very bad, and there is no real in between. Resto Druid. For me, Resto Druid is going to be a plus spec. They have crazy mobility, they have crazy healing, hots. They are very hard to kill, so most people are just not going for Resto Druid kill. They have Tranquility, which is basically a immunity. You have some great burst healing, some great consistent healing. You have somewhat damage here and there, but in Soul Shuffle, you don't really need to interact with people to win. At least not as a Resto Druid. They are like one of those more passive healers where sometimes you can do a Cyclone, but the damage is not going to be there. In general, I think it's a great healer to play and to master. I don't think it's S tier because there is just one spec that is just that much better, and they are in competition with another healing A plus. At least in my mind, I'm going to also show you very soon. But in general, you will see a Resto Druid. You will have to deal with the mobility, deal with the cyclones, deal with the actual healing, even while they are CC'd. And some healers, whenever they're getting CC'd, they have like no options to actually win games. Now, Disc Priest. Disc Priest is for me a A tier spec because they have damage, and damage is something that sometimes is enough to win games. Like that's like a tendency that I'm going to repeat all the time. A healer with damage can prevent getting like a lot of damage towards their teammates because they will have to like make other people play more defensives. And also the atonement healing, you have also some great burst healing, you have some great CC and also some great CDs to use to get people out of harm's way. So that's also a very good thing. Leap of Fate is something that is going to be very useful. Massy Spell, which is like great. You have like the boosted master spell from the class tree. Mind games are still there, so still very useful for you. You can play more the aggressive build for Disc Priest, or you can play the more conservative Disc Priest build. I'm going to discuss it in a future guide, but in my opinion, Disc Priest is really underrated. A lot of people are putting Disc Priest in B tier or even in C tier for some reason, but Disc Priest, they have some great healing. And again, pain suppression, barrier. Okay, some people are like running off the barrier, but by itself, just a conception where they are not affected by dampening because of like barrier and pain suppression, it is just gigantic. A lot of classes are actually struggling with dampening, but Disc Priest is not really struggling with that. So for me, it's a meta spec. Shadow Priest, it is A plus. They have a lot of damage. They have a lot of utility, a lot of defensives. It is very hard to kill. It has a lot of CC and a lot of CDs to use. So just because of those like combination of things that they have, it just warrants a A plus spot. I think Shadow Priest struggle versus like a triple melee comp, like a triple melee solo shuffle, excuse me. So if you play versus like two melees and you have one melee with you, it becomes very hard to actually cast spells. But luckily you have a dot build and you have like a direct damage build. You also have a more like casting build. with the talents that you can use to actually cast more spells and do more damage, or you can play more of an instant damage, like damage dealer caster, which is more like bursty with dots, and you can just spread those dots like on multiple target and try to cleave them at the same time. But just because of that, you have a lot of like ways to be um, flexible into the solo shuffle. That's something very, very good because a lot of classes don't have that, at least in solo shuffle, and Shadow Priest do have that. They also have great CC, which makes it a lot easier to win games with a Shadow Priest. And because of that fact, A plus is the right spot, and that's also my prediction. I think they are even going to be S tier if they get a buff somewhat some way. If they do get a nerf, I think it will drop to A tier, but that's it. I think just the CC, the utility, and the defensives is enough to actually perform. Holy Priest. Holy Priest is B tier. I just think it is just not as good as Disc Priest. They do have a lot of great healing, but once they are CC'd, they don't have a lot of options. They do have damage, but it's not as much as Disc Priest. They have better CC because Chastise is really something good, but it's losing a lot of good things from Shadowlands. The Forset, the Res Lego, like Miracle Worker being a talent instead of a PvP talent, so you have a lot of difficulties with healing, and you have to choose between self defense, healing, and doing damage. And that's something that a lot of classes don't have to choose, and Holy Priest will have to choose, and that makes it just a bit worse overall. Preservation. I think preservation is probably the best spec in the game, even ahead of Havoc Demon Hunter. If I have to create a whole tier, it would be preservation basically, and then you have Havoc, and then you have the rest. I think Demonology is really the third wheeler in the S tier spot, but preservation, they have the damage, they have great healing, they still have no PvP modifier on mana. I just hope they are going to put it in season 1 at least. If they don't, then I think preservation is going to be overall a S tier spec, like in PvE, PvP, Mythic, Raid, everything. And I hope they don't do that. They have utility, they have CDs, they have ways to actually move allies to a safe spot, something that is really strong because a lot of people have shit positioning. Um, they're annoying to kill. They have like a whole party ice block, which is insane. I think preservation is also the better spec from Evoker. I think devastation is a nothing, like compared to a preservation Evoker. I think the gameplay and the style of play is just so much more refined as a preservation evoker than a devastation evoker. I played a bit of devastation. I think it's fun to burst someone down with a one shot, but outside of that, it is very gimmicky. And just because of that fact, I think it is a really low tier A tier. For me, it is even on the verge of being B tier. If it is between A and B, it would be B plus and not A minus. It is not as good as people would think. It has a one shot, but if you know what is, or at least when it's happening, you have at least a lot of ways to counter it. You should play a devastation evoker to actually know whenever it happens, and whenever they are actually doing a sequence of spells, you can use your mobility, or you can just run away or CC him, and you will maybe break their whole setup. But you should play Devastation to actually know how to stop the Devastation spec. Survival Hunter, I think it's a B tier spec. It is very average. I think like Big Mac said, a great Survivor Hunter might make it feel like an A tier spec, but really, really the most amount of people playing a Survivor Hunter will make it feel like a average spec. And I think it is ahead of Arms Outlaw, but it is really behind destruction. They will have to talent Diamond Eyes to actually make people not break the traps. That's a possibility to make it work. They have good damage, but the defensives are very little. You don't have Craven Stratagem anymore, so people that are going to do bleeds on you, so Feral Druids, a Demon Hunter, for example, having Demon Hunter, Fury Warriors, Armed Warriors, they are going to wreck you, and you will have to play Mending Bandage, and then you have like 2 out of the 3 PvP talents used to actually survive, and you have also Survival Tactics as a PvP talent that you will have to use, and basically it will make you use PvP talents just to exist. And I think just because of that, it's a B tier spec. Of course, you can make it like work, and that's why B tier is not bad. It just is average. You can make those specs work, but it will just happen to be harder than, let's say, everything above A plus. And even I would say casters are in general harder to play, but versus a survival hunter, I think an affliction or a shadow is just easier to play than a survival hunter. BM Hunter is the first C tier spec, in my opinion. It has good damage, it's consistent. They have CC. It's a bit harder to actually place, the same as Survival Hunter. I think they just lack the depth to actually do a lot of like good in Soul Shuffle. If they get nerfed somewhat, some way, they just disappear. If they get buffed, they might be B tier or A tier, but I predict it to be a average spec for us like Soul Shuffle. C tier, it is basically the tier where it's on the verge of being B tier or D tier, depending on buff or in nerf. But I'm like really thinking about BM. I think it's not bad. I just think it's lacking compared to other specs. It is much more hard to actually like do damage. I think playing BM is easy. Everyone knows that. It has like so little buttons that you can't really miss your rotation. But I think it's hard to actually perform to do some great one shots because people are just going to have weak auras. So they will have the weak aura for Call of the Wild where you have like a lot of pets going in and have like a lot of damage. People will just try to fear them, and once the pets are feared, you have like no way to do damage while the CD is going. Okay, MM Hunter. MM Hunter for me is a tier spec. A lot of people are actually putting MM Hunter in C tier. I don't know even why people are like underestimating again the power of one shots, the power of actually deleting people, because like I said, damage is enough to make solo shuffle actually work. A lot of classes in B tier are in B tier because they don't have the damage to be applied towards the enemy, and MM Hunter don't have the difficulty of actually getting interrupted. That's not going to happen. They are going to get stunned or feared or trained while they are doing damage, but they are not going to get like silenced or interrupted, and that's something very big. I think you can still delete people in an opener if you have like a great opener with your friend or your ally to actually like go on that kill target. You can really win in the first minute. Again, I think people are underestimating MM. They don't really change from Shadowlands. They do get buffs every time. So I think they are going to be very good in Soul Shuffle. They are nowhere C tier. So again, comment below what you think about the placement of MM. I think I'm not harsh. I think I know exactly what I'm actually waiting in Soul Shuffle whenever I see a MM. I know I'm going to get obliterated if I'm not focusing the MM. And a lot of people are just like letting the MM do like his thing, and that makes it very hard to actually perform versus that class. And for me, it's a meta spec. Elemental Shaman is a B tier spec for the same problem as Frost Mage and Destruction Warlock. They just have a lot of difficulties to exist in melee centric solo shuffles. It has some great matchups where you're playing versus casters, you can really perform, but you cannot expect solo shuffles to be very just towards you. You will need to actually play your class, your design, and your spec as good as possible. And elemental shamans, they have the damage, they have the utility, they have the defensives. They are really on the verge of being meta. But the problem is, you could end up versus a Havoc Demon Hunter, a Fury Warrior, and a, let's say, Feral Druid, and you will not exist because of the amounts of CC that they have, the amounts of like burstiness, the amounts of stickiness. It means that it's very hard to actually make it work. I think I'm even very generous of putting in them at B tier because it just is a lot harder to perform on that class. I think classes in general is just a bit harder to play than meaties, especially in solo shuffle, and for me, it deserves the B spot as an average spec. Of course, in threes or in twos, it is different, but I'm just talking about solo shuffle. Enhancement Shaman is a A tier spec, insane damage, insane off heal, insane utility, insane defensives. For me, just because of that, it deserves the meta spec, meta tier set. Just for that, it deserves the A tier spot. Um, I think people are underestimating Enhancement Shaman for some reason, but they have a lot of builds to make it work, and they have a build where they could be more sticky or play more ranged and do more damage. You have mastery builds, you have haste builds, so again, a lot of variety, and I think the surprise effect is super important because Enhancement Shaman is not really super popular in retail. Now let's talk about Restoration Shamans. I think Restoration Shamans in Soul Shuffle, they are probably better than Holy Priest. For me, they are better than Holy Priest. I think it's just a bit worse than Disc Priest because the healing throughput is really low. You can make it work with the utility alone, with the defenses, but also with the damage. But whenever you need the extra healing, whenever you need the extra oomph, I think Restoration Shaman is just lacking. For me, Restoration Shaman is better than Holy Priest, so it's really on the verge of A tier. If they get buffed, they could be insane. Um, but they need healing throughput and they need to get buff somehow, some way. And the problem is, it is tied to mastery. And if they buff the Restoration Shaman, it is multiplicative with the mastery. So if they get like a 10% buff right now, in a few weeks, whenever people get gear for mastery, it becomes not a 10% buff, but like a 20 or 30% buff. And then it becomes like problematic to actually know what is going on and how it becomes so strong. For me, it's a B tier spec and really very good. I think people are just underestimating it. Frost DK. Frost DK is a tier spec. I think it has insane damage. It has insane survivability versus casters. They have loads of builds. They can play a Holding Blast build. They can play a Frost Strike build. They can play an Obliterate build. They can even do a mixed match of those, and they will still perform. They still have a lot of ways to actually like CC you. They have two stuns. They actually have three stuns. Two of them are AoE. You have a AoE blind. You have a silence. You have a good interrupt, which is insane. So for me, Frost DK are going to perform very good, well, very well in Soul Shuffle. Unholy DK is A plus. They are just a bit better than Frost DK. They have more consistent damage. They are like more tanky for the Casa spec. And in general, I think Unholy DK is just easier to play than Frost DK right now. Of course, you have more mechanics with the wounds, with diseases, with the gargoyle. But I think the amount of damage that you're going to do is really rush downy. It's you can play more of a consistent build where you're playing with diseases, but you should be careful because some classes can just dispel it right away, and just because of that, you could make it a lot harder for yourself playing that spec or that build. But for me, it's an A plus spec, and it is really on the verge of a S tier. If Havoc gets nerfed, it becomes insanely strong because they get nerfed, like they get countered by DH really easily. Holy Paladin. So I think Holy Paladin are on the same level as Holy Priest. They are really close to each other. They do somewhat okay healing, but it is very, very clunky. I think it's also very hard for them because if they play versus casters, they don't have Bop. So basically, Bop doesn't do anything. Ultimate Sacrifice is something that you can use, but people can just switch onto you and becomes very hard. You will have to divine shield right away, and if you are divine shielding yourself really quickly, it becomes like a easy kill for the enemy team. They have some damage here and there, but I would not count on it. And I think they will need to change Holy Paladin somewhat, some way in the future to actually make it easier to balance. Retribution Paladin, I think in solo shuffle it deserves the A plus spot. I know people are going to go insane, but Retribution Paladin, they have a lot of utility. They have somewhat good defensives because again, invulns are very strong. Like Divine Shield could save you a game. They have great off healing. They have great damage, and just because of that, the burstiness is very important. And I think it's A plus. I know a lot of people are like complaining about Retribution being like bad, and I don't see them actually being right. I see just okay, you're right about design. They are really shoehorned into one build, but that one build is very strong. And if that build is very strong, it deserves the A plus. You don't need 10 builds to make it good. If you have one good build, it deserves the A plus spot. So for me, Retribution is really strong. Mistweaver monks are A plus tier, and they are very close to Resto Druid. They are the second most passive healer. I think it's the most passive healer in general because fist weaving is not working, or at least it's very risky. And Mistweaver are one of those healers where if they are not getting interrupted, nothing dies. They have like a lot of oh shit buttons, and that's enough to actually win games. Like Preservation, Evoker, Resto Druid, and Mistweaver monks have a lot of oh shit buttons, and that's enough to win games by itself. Windwalker, and Windwalker is one of those classes where it's either feast or famine. You're going to do very good or you're going to do alrightish. And because of that, I think it's more average. They are very setupy. They need a lot of help to make it work. Um, it's not the easiest thing to do either. I'm going to move my camera so you can see. I think I might be underestimating Windwalkers. They do some great one shots. They have somewhat okay consistent damage, although probably people are just going to stop you right away. Um, for me, it's a B tier spec. Now we are at the tank categories, so we're going to talk those 6 tanks very briefly, and I'm going to give you somewhat of a rating. I think most tanks are just not meta. They are just not good. You should not play a tank in solo shuffle, but if you want to play a tank, this is my explanation for you guys, or at least my prediction for you guys. Blood DK is a C tier spec. I would even say F tier DG spec. I think it's going to be a C tier because they have some great AoE capacities. They have self healing. They are somewhat squishy because of the 30% increased damage, but they have ways to do damage a lot easier. They are no brain. You can just do death chains and you're good. You're going to do some damage. But now, are you going to carry games? I don't think so. To be honest, I want to put it in D tier, but okay guys, I'm going to move some things. I'm going to put Fire Mage at the same level as BM. I'm going to put Blood Decay at D tier because it's unfair. I think Fire Mages are not as bad as Blood Decays, but I think the difficulty is very hard to actually well, like rate tanks because we don't see a lot of tanks like at the moment. And for me, Blood Decays, they are just underwhelming. You can make it work. You can win games, and of course you're competing only versus your own class. So you could be rank 1 with Blood Decay when everyone is down, but still, we will have to see if it's going to be meta or what. But for me, it's a D tier spec. Protection Warriors, I'm going to put it in B tier because I saw some Protection Warriors here and there. You have some one-shot potential, you have some great damage here and there. You have CC, you have Annoyance. I think it's average. I think it's behind like Subtlety. It's not really rated from left to right because again, Soul Shuffle is very very random. Protection Warriors could be better than Windwalkers, but also being worse than a Subtlety Rogue. So for me, Protection Warrior, they are average. They could do more damage, but it is hard to actually perform. You don't really have a Mortal Strike effect. I don't know. It's a worse version than the Arms Warrior. So if I have to choose between Arms or Protection, I think Arms is just better, like plainly. Of course, Protection Warriors, people are not going to focus you, so you have some way to actually defend yourself. But is it going to be enough? For me, it's an average spec. I don't know enough about Vengeance Demon Hunter. I'm going to be honest, I'm going to put it in D tier. I might be wrong, so please let me know in the comment section below. I just feel like people are just playing Havoc. They don't play a Vengeance Demon Hunter, so that's why I'm just going to put it in D tier because I have lack of information. I'm not going to say you something I'm not really inclined to think. So for me, for now, I'm putting in at D tier. Guardian Druid, I think it's better than Protection Warrior, so for me it's going to be an A tier spec. Yeah, it is annoying. It still has damage. It doesn't have the sleep legendary anymore, so at least you're like not immune to CC. At least in Dragonflight. But for me, it is still it's a meta spec for a tank, but it's not really the best. If you have to think about Feral Druids and Guardian Druid, I think Feral Druids are just more flexible, better, and you can carry more faster than a Guardian Druid. I think if you're playing Guardian Druid, you're trying to say, look, carry me until we win enough rounds. You can win games by yourself, but it's random, right? If you're like left alone, you're not going to win games. So for me, it's a 8 tier spec, but among the tanks. So if I have to compare DPSs with the Guardian Druid, I think Guardian Druid are a bit lower than 8 tier. Protection Paladin, I think it's C tier. To be honest, I just never see two Paladins queuing in. You are a Protection Paladin. A Protection Paladin is considered as a healer, and they only play with themselves. So with like other Protection Paladins. So for me, it is going to be C tier. It's probably the worst healer. So that's why I have to make some separation with the other healers. Brewmaster Monk, I'm going to be honest, I have no information about that. For me, it's a D tier spec. Vengeance, Neon Hunter, and Brewmaster, they are just like lack of information. I don't know if it's going to be good or not. So for me, it's a D tier spec compared to a Protection Paladin and a Protection Warrior. So this is the end of the tier list. My throat is hurting, but I'm very very happy that I went through. It's my prediction for Dragonflight. I talk briefly about every spec, and please let me know in the comment section below what you think about that tier list, about the specs I've discussed. Are you okay with my prediction? Are you not okay with my prediction? Again, I repeat, it is a prediction, so I don't know if it's going to be meta in Dragonflight Season 1, because nobody knows. They could do a big PvP patch, and then everything is going to get blown into the water. So for me, prediction Season 1, this is my tier list. Please like the video if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet, and please make sure to stay safe. We will catch each other very soon into a next video. Have a great day. Bye.